Hey guys, we are recording in Belgium, and this is where I've crossed paths with a longtime viewer of my channel, known to my supporters on Patreon as Mohammed Socrates. So Mohammed has asked a number of the most interesting questions that sparked some of the most interesting and longest videos on my channel. I think we did like a 1 hour answer to one of your questions. This sort of thing has come from time to time. He's a guy who has a lot of interest in history, politics, and philosophy, although actually your formal area of education is biochemistry, right? Yeah, exactly. So biology and chemistry. And the last couple of days, we met face-to-face the first time. We've had many interesting conversations, and we've now visited 2 museums together. So he got subjected to several hours of constant lecturing on art, history, and politics at first the Art Museum and today the Museum of War, Museum of Military History. It's been a lot of fun. So another thing to mention, he's in many ways wise beyond his years, and he speaks several languages, diverse experience in different countries around the world. But in fact, I was shocked when it came up that he is only 21. Yeah?
Yeah.
So you started watching my channel when you were 18 years old.
Yeah, I think it's on the edge.
Something like that.
18 and 19, yeah.
So it is I don't know, surprising for me to think that this is somebody who I've in some ways been in dialogue with, since he was 18 or 19 years old. To some extent, my monologues about politics have been politics and probably also religion and philosophy, have been a contrasting view in your life that you've
you always talk about the concept of scrutiny in politics, but I think this is an example where it played a large role in my personal life. The presence of your videos in my life do represent the role of scrutiny,
right?
Personal life and how they can change someone's perspectives a lot, and positively that. I didn't expect that I could find a vegan who also is very philosophically sophisticated and very politically active. Like most of the vegans on YouTube were basically just talking about the scientific and the health side of the debate, and all the other perspectives and aspects got basically no attention at all, especially the philosophical side. And I actually got introduced to you through the drama with Durian Rider.
Oh yeah,
this is what made you actually famous.
Right.
I wouldn't have heard from you at all if it weren't for this drama, actually. So something positive came
But you stayed with the channel. You may have noticed it because of the drama, but you kept watching because you were actually interested in the philosophy of politics,
I immediately clicked on the playlists and videos on your channel and checked out the topics of what is this talking about, and I immediately got interested.
Right.
I assume this guy is different than the other, because I was really disappointed and bored with the other channels.
Sure.
I was basically just watching Vegan Gains for the thrill and comedy.
Right.
That's basically it. I wasn't hoping to get anything useful or interesting or new from it.
Well, I know. Obviously, I feel the same way about vegan YouTube. People often ask me, what channels do I watch? And sometimes my answer is nothing, or there's one channel I'm watching. There are very, very few that interest me. But the other thing I can imagine is how different my own life would be if, when I was your age, when I was 19 to 21, if there was someone like me that I was watching on YouTube, if there was someone, even if I disagreed with them about many issues, to stimulate that. I was saying to Melissa's here off camera, by the way, I was saying to Melissa a couple days ago that, one of my problems growing up was that I was not stupid enough to idolize Noam Chomsky. You know Noam Chomsky? Yeah. There were figures like that in the media, in the newspapers and so on. And I know for a lot of people, Noam Chomsky was that challenging, political figure. But to me, he was a joke. I just basically found him stupid, or too stupid to take seriously. I'm also was not stupid enough to idolize the president of the United States. George W. Bush or something. Wow. When you look up to George W. Bush, what does he symbolize? Boy, reading the autobiography of George W. Bush changed my life. I've never heard anyone say that. I've never heard anyone say that. But yeah, that was part of my own crisis was them not having anyone to look up to. And now, at least recently, there've been a lot of videos about it. When I was no longer when I lost faith in the family religion, that I was really in many ways raised to be a communist and rejected communism and rejected Marxism too, which is a separate stage. There was first rejecting communism, then rejecting Marxism, and then you look around and really there was nothing to replace it with. There was nothing positive I could relate to. So yeah, if I had discovered someone like me at that time, even if I had rejected me, that rejection would have been a really interesting, process to go through. Would have been something to respond to.
Yeah, I definitely can appreciate like the influence your videos and channel had throughout my life. Like, it's very it's not a very superficial difference you made, although it was very gradual and through like over 3 years.
Yeah, right. Yeah,
like, I didn't even feel the big transitions I've gone through this past 3 years, but it was certainly profound, like the change. It's not necessarily that I just adopted all your views, but it's
right. No, of course,
you really stimulated my my skeptical faculties. Like, I questioned a lot of presuppositions I was making like earlier, and I changed my whole outlook on veganism. Like before, it was actually basically just hell. Like,
really?
It was less.
Okay.
Healthy living, yeah. But,
okay, that's interesting.
And it happens that this scientific evidence pointed to veganism or like whole food plant-based diets as the most.
We've been talking for 2 days, but I wouldn't have guessed that about you because you care so much about politics generally.
Yeah.
I would have thought, okay, but that's interesting.
But I wasn't aware of any other aspects of veganism, like especially the environmental, the ecological side of it. I knew that vegans do emit the fewest amounts of CO2 and those other facts. Like there were like I think I read about it like after I went vegan, like maybe after a year or so. But it wasn't really the motivating factor initially. Yeah, but later, like I lost interest in like in the stringent health arguments. Like and I began to look for something to keep me vegan long term, and basically your channel was the answer. Like, it kind of came in.
Thank you.
Came
at the right moment.
Right moment. Yeah.
Well, just something you said there briefly. In the first year, even the first 2 years of my channel, when I tried to talk to other vegans on YouTube, by email normally, but then later by Skype or something, the first thing they'd always say to me was, "I don't agree with all of the views on your channel, but." And I started saying to them, I got maybe the first time, I didn't say this the first couple times, but this happens so often. I remember saying to people, would you really want to watch a channel where you agree with everything the person says? Like,
it would be too boring. Like,
right. No, but also I talk about some challenging stuff. Like, I'm not saying this to insult you or anyone, but if someone came to my channel, I made a video recently about politics in Cambodia. Why would you agree with me? Like most of my viewers, you probably never even thought about this. You don't have any opinion about, current politics in Cambodia. So, it's challenging to you no matter what, but if you come to my channel, you really think, I thought democracy in Cambodia was doing just fine. And here you are saying it's a disaster. So many of the things I was making videos about, of course they're challenging. Of course they're unexpected. But yeah, I remember that. But so I was just going to say, I think what that reflected was the mentality at the time. So maybe 2015, 2016, that to be a viewer of a channel meant that you were a cult follower.
Yeah.
Like Durian Rider, like this kind of thing. And no, that's not what my channel's about. Okay, disagree with me. Let's, maybe these things are worth disagreeing about. I don't want to disagree about trivial crap. I'm really not into that. But a lot of things are worth disagreeing about. Okay, cool. So look, I have no idea what the questions are, but you said you had some questions to ask me. So hit me with the questions.
I wanted to ask this on the comments.
Decaf. This is decaf.
I didn't get to it. Okay. You always talk about how you don't need belief to be a vegan and to recognize the moral significance of the vegan message. And you always talk like your problem is not with religion or ideology, it's with belief itself. But I couldn't swallow this pill. Like, how could you even make moral judgments and evaluations without having some kind of presuppositions or belief about what good and bad is. But
right.
Like, it's not like drawing, like, or painting a painting on a
right.
on a white sheet of paper. Like, I don't know. I felt the analogy kind of misleading or incomplete.
Right. So, okay, in terms of the European tradition, one of the marks of the Enlightenment, so this is meaning the Enlightenment as a period of history. By the way, here we've got the history of France in Chinese is holding up the microphone at the moment. And it does. It goes over the history of the Enlightenment in France in Chinese. One of the big ideas in the period of the Enlightenment, including in authors like Jean-Jacques Rousseau, was a lot of optimism about reason with a capital R, reason and rationality, right? And during my lifetime, instead, there was a lot of cynicism, a lot of lowered expectations about reason and rationality. I'd say the 1990s were maybe a major period of this, in philosophy and in pop culture.
Yeah.
But I would say my views are based on a very limited optimism about reason. So in the last 2 days, we've talked about many really hopeless political situations. Saudi Arabia, Afghanistan, I don't know. Sorry, we have talked about some political conflicts around the world that is not easy to be optimistic about, right? There are a lot of social problems like water pollution and air pollution and people eating meat and wearing leather shoes and wearing fur coats where it's hard to be optimistic. But in a particular scenario, like when I say to someone who drinks cow milk, a normal meat-eating type of person, when I say to someone, if you see a cow in a farmer's field, would you be willing to get down on your hands and knees and shuffle over to the cow and drink the milk out of the cow's udder, right? What am I appealing to? So this is my conviction. This is my conclusion. I don't think I'm appealing to their belief. I don't think I'm appealing to their faith. I think I am appealing to their sense of the absurd, right? And they arrive at this sense of the absurd through a very limited use of reason, right? Now, sorry, just another example real quick. Melissa knows this. So the day before yesterday, or maybe yesterday, we haven't been sleeping much, jet lag and arrives in New York. But when we were at the airport, this was at London Airport, the woman who was the head of security, she interrogated me a little tiny bit. And, my position was, in talking to her, I said at one point, I don't have to answer your question. Either I have civil rights or you don't. I said either you have civil rights or you don't. Either person. It's a question of civil rights. So now, again, what am I appealing to in this? And it was, Melissa and I have talked about it, it was a slightly surreal negotiation where there's nothing to negotiate. I'm there to get searched. I said, no, go ahead and search me. I'm happy to be searched. That's really all I have to say. But no, I have no answers to any other questions. Let's just do this. Ultimately, I'm not appealing to her goodness of heart. I'm not appealing to her charity of spirit. I am trying to appeal to her sense of the absurd, to reason in this limited sense. What are you asking me? You're going to search me. Let's get on with the search. Like, there's nothing to talk about here. So again, sorry, it's a funny situation in our own lives. Sorry, and again, in that same conflict, this woman complained, I think for no good reason. I think you agree with that. She complained that I had somehow disrespected her and insulted her. And I didn't respond. I pointed this to most of the importance of this. I didn't respond by saying, no, I never insulted you. That would have escalated the conflict. I responded with a question. I said, have I said one word that was insulting to you? And this managed to bring it down. So, this is a ridiculous, but this is a real world situation. Some of us with police or with authority figures are in this situation. What am I appealing to, and what does my conduct show on my part? I don't have faith in humanity. I don't have faith in the Constitution or in some abstract political thing. There's this really base level of human reason and a sense of what's absurd. Like, are you going to interrogate me for complying with being searched? What are we doing here? What is the question about? I'm taking off my clothes. I'm happy to do the search. What do you want to know? What do you want to ask me? Sorry. This is not a philosophical situation. But for me, honestly, it does. Reflecting on it and talking about it afterwards, there is a little bit of a philosophical depth. Now, so what are the limits to this? Sorry, so I mean, you're asking about. So, is your question? Can we challenge evil without faith, or can we do good without faith? I mean, these are all kind of encompassed within your question, right? I mean, like, you know. So, do you want to speak to that point? I mean,
yeah. I think I can formulate my question like this: can we make any moral judgments without having some philosophical or religious presuppositions about what good and evil is?
Yeah, it's funny. I think I asked you about this a couple weeks ago.
Is the sense of the absurd a reliable source of moral judgments and moral care? Moral,
right. And my answer is to a limited extent, yes. But yeah, okay. You want to jump in? You were going to say something?
No, I remember asking.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Question because you don't believe in belief. You don't believe in morality.
Right. So I got this question about epistemology a couple months ago and answered it on Discord on a live broadcast that wasn't recorded. And one of the first part of the answer when I was asked this about epistemology, so epistemology without belief, how do we know anything? And I pointed out, look, when we're not in an academic classroom, when we're not in a university lecture hall with a chalkboard, we are almost never asking the question, how do I know this apple is red? I don't have an apple here. How do I know this representation of a raspberry and a strawberry is red? This kind of question. This is an academic question that we ask in the classroom, But I mean, sorry, obviously this extends to good and evil also. Questions of moral judgment. We're almost never dealing with a very abstract question like this. And sorry, and I just mentioned, both in the university classroom and in the practical sciences, this can be answered in a very technical sense. Like when we, use a mass spectrometer or pass a ray of light over this and measure the wavelength of the light, at what point does it stop being orange and start being red? There is a kind of technical, the science of optics or whatever. But this is not what people are really asking. They don't want a technical answer. They want a philosophical answer, and it may not be susceptible to on this level of specificity. Most of what we're dealing with in the real world, like being interrogated by the authorities, we're normally dealing with contrasting values of this kind. Earlier today you were asking me questions about practical real world democratic reform. The actual phrase in the question, you said, but do you really think that modern mixed economies like Denmark, Sweden, and I forget the other example, but
Norway.
Yeah, maybe like some successful economies and democratic societies like this in Western Europe. You said, do you really think they're the ideal other countries should aspire to imitate? And I said, no, it's not that I think that they're the ideal, but I think there's something that pragmatically many countries you could benefit from, you could learn lessons from within the next 10, 20 years. There's something practical. This isn't about knowing what's ideal. Yeah. It's about contrasting real world examples in real situations. So on a course level, like this example of would you get on your hands and knees and drink the milk out of a cow's udder, I do think this completely non-belief based mode of reasoning that it does work, right? And again, in terms of apperception of color, can I just perceive that this is an apple? Can I just perceive that this is red? Which is almost never what people really want to talk about in epistemology. You may have to in academic epistemology. They're normally more meaningful questions. How do we know what's beautiful? How do we know what's divine? There's some other question people really want to get at, not the shade of red on an apple, or how can we tell that an apple is an apple. But I mean, the nature of the judgments we're making in the real world often is like I'm being interrogated, and the woman interrogating me says I disrespected her, and I have to ask, did I say one word that disrespected you? Am I, and what's happening here? This is the kind of thing we have to negotiate, and not against a blank canvas or against a blank chalkboard, putting a circle around what's good and what's evil. So on a coarse and crude level, which is where most of the important political and even ecological questions lie, I do think we can do this without faith. So, to give an example, a boy I went to high school with, who's now a university professor, unlike myself, he had a serious learning disability, but he nevertheless went on to become a university professor. I wonder how he copes now with that. He had something like dyslexia. It wasn't the same as dyslexia. He broke into the science lab at the high school and they stole all of the thermometers and a number of other expensive instruments. And they sat on the sidewalk smashing the thermometers and stealing the mercury so they could have mercury to play with. And of course, broken glass and mercury went into the storm drain. And I was not there. I was not a part of this. I talked to him about it more than a year after it happened, after he did this. And I remember asking him, seriously, trying to have a Socratic dialogue, did he or did he not consider this evil? You know? And there are several types of evil to question here. There are the literal, the downstream consequences, the water pollution, the ecological pollution. There's the fact that you're damaging the school and the classroom and the ability to provide education to people. Like the school is losing its scientific equipment or its thermometer stab you. There's different kinds of damage involved here. Sorry, I mean I'm joking about it, but these are the real world questions of good and evil. Another one I talked about. Sorry, again, this was when I was in high school. There was a girl, and I believe I knew for a fact that she was raped and her older sister were raped repeatedly by their father. That they were he had been a regular rapist of his own children. That he was otherwise generally a pedophile. Now, and so from my perspective, I knew this as a fact. Now, would it be? Oh, sorry. And this is the real clincher. Maybe you don't know this video. You didn't see it. It was a long time ago. I made a video talking about this. He was a judge at a very high level in the court system. Now, actually, someone who really wants to dox me or something could actually take the information here and figure out who I'm talking about. But it was suppressed. The journalists who tried to cover the story, most of the coverage of it was suppressed. I believe that Frank magazine somehow covered it or mentioned it. That was a rebellious political publication in Canada. But the mainstream newspapers and so on, I was told they tried to publish on it and it was censored because he was so high placed in the system. Now, what is the good or evil thing to do if you are a young man who grew up reading Batman comics? And, I had to really think that through. And I decided then that violence was not the answer. And I'm still living by that today. I mean, that was a real world situation of trying to figure out what's good and evil, or what's even acceptable, what's even tolerable, not what's ideal, not what's perfect. These are real world situations. So on that coarse level, I think coarse, is a good word for it. I think, you can without faith, know this kind of thing. Now, are there some moral distinctions that are so fine, so particular, and for that reason, I think so aesthetic in their nature, that it's more like asking, when does red become orange? When does red become pink? Is there some ethical distinction like this? I'm open to that possibility. But I don't think it will matter very much in politics or even in your real personal life. Like, I'm open to the possibility there are some aesthetic judgments, because that's how you phrased it. Was about there are some ethical judgments that in effect are so refined that they become aesthetic, and that then you get into these more particular questions. Okay, is it okay to divorce my wife and then marry her younger sister? In some cultures, that's really considered a terrible crime. I mean, it's considered a kind of unforgivable sin. And you can see why. I mean, it's gross. I mean, it's creepy. Like, so what, you were cheating on your wife with her younger sister or something? You can see why. But on the other hand, I mean, probably today in California, for most English-speaking people, they probably don't see that as incest, which it was in Shakespeare's time. In the plays of Shakespeare, for a woman to leave her husband for her husband's brother, that was incest as a punishable crime and so on. Are we now into a realm of, questions of family duty and honor, and where we're really getting into a more culturally relative aesthetic sort of judgment, where you can't ask in the same simple way. So I asked before, would you get down on your hands and knees and drink the milk out of a cow's udder? Would you dump mercury into the rain sewers in Toronto? Would you smash up a bunch of scientific instruments? No, I mean, these are real questions. But I think that this is on a pretty coarse level. Would you accept it if a man divorced one of your sisters to get married to your younger sister? So again, maybe this
depends on the circumstances.
Right, but it doesn't have this. It doesn't have this simple sense of this limited ration where reason just reveals how absurd it is. Immediately, I would guess. Because I have two sisters. I don't know. You could probably imagine a situation like, Greg, he's not that bad a guy. I don't know. Didn't work out for Greg and Mary. He can try it with Sue. I don't know. Maybe you don't care. Maybe when it's your own sister, or maybe even if, as an abstract principle, you'd object to it when you'd actually be in that situation. So yeah, maybe there are some ethical distinctions, some ethical judgments. Yeah, but I think those will always be the less important ones. So did you see my video with Mod Vegan? I did a 3-hour debate on ethics of cocaine use.
No, this video was a little bit too long for me.
I don't blame you. Right, but just on a coarse level of judgment, when I ask her, or I could ask you, look, would you allow your own daughter to use cocaine? Is that okay from your perspective? And in reality, everyone will answer no. Even if you yourself have been a cocaine addict in the past or a cocaine user, you do not want your daughter to become, or son if you have a son, whatever. So this is at the same level of absurdity, rational absurdity that's just revealed by reason, I think. And then the next question is, okay, given that you don't want your own daughter to become a cocaine, or your own sister, or your own mother, how do you justify making cocaine legal and available and so on? How does this translate into drug policy? Now, believe me, I'm not saying it's that simple to then arrive at a good legal policy, a specific framework for what is the government's policy on drug abolition or public education. But on the coarse level of ethical judgment, I think that is an example again where it's I don't need to believe in anything. I don't need any kind of faith, to proceed on that basis.
But here's the problem with this philosophy, let's say.
Sure.
The sense of the absurd, can you really say that it's the same with everyone? Maybe I don't find some things absurd that others find such, and maybe what's motivating me is the sense of disgust, maybe from this crowd, not the sense of absurd.
Yes, I agree.
For example,
I agree. I think disgust is a factor in all of them. Yes. Yeah.
How would you generalize such a moral? I don't know.
Right.
Can you even call it a philosophy? It doesn't really have much of a logical structure,
Well, I think it's almost an anti-philosophy.
Yeah.
I think nihilism is in some ways an anti-philosophy, and it's in some ways a positive and constructive philosophy. Okay.
So how would a society structured on such principles?
Oh, okay, great. So that's good.
Is it even feasible for
sure.
an actual human
So I can answer both questions. So I'm a nihilist. I believe every society is structured that way in reality, because in reality, people in power make these decisions on the basis of animus, and their values are not universal. That's exactly why we have constant political controversy. So until quite recently, in Japan, up to a certain point, child pornography was legal, was permissible in Japan. And then they had a period of history where photographed child pornography was illegal, but not cartoons and drawings. And then finally, they made that illegal. I forget if it was last year, but there were newspaper stories about it. Japan finally makes child pornography illegal. Now, to my knowledge, I think every other country in the world, it's either illegal or the country is in such a state of chaos that they don't have any laws at all. There are a few countries where there's just no written laws working at the moment. Laos was like that for a long time, but but it's not like people intentionally made it legal. But Japan was going to this was legal and permitted. Now you might think that was an example that's so revolting that you mentioned disgust. I think disgust is an element where you say, look, this is immoral and disgusting and everyone else is revolted by it, so why aren't you? Well, not everyone's revolted, and that's exactly why there's not just controversy, but coercion. So at any given time, there's a minority of people in power in any of these countries we're going to talk about, any real-world country in the current century. And they make decisions that may be wildly incompatible with the majority of people. Other ethical systems make claims to universal values. So Immanuel Kant is one of the most absurd about this, but generally, this is a big part of the Western tradition and, monotheistic traditions and so on. They say this is X, Y, and Z are universal, and everybody agrees with it. Therefore, therefore, therefore. And we all know, in reality, the exact opposite is true. So, supposing I were to say to you, the belief in human rights is universal, X, Y, and Z. And I've seen statements from the United Nations of this. The belief in this list of human rights is universal and inviolable and indestructible and made out of steel. We all know the exact opposite is true. This list of human rights is a type of myth. It's a type of mythology. It's a type of fable. And it's paper thin. And it's weak and timorous. And we want everyone to pretend it's universal and inviolable. And in fact, almost nobody believes in it. Even the average police officer doesn't believe in it. And the average police officer doesn't in any way conduct and live his life as if he believes in this list of human rights. Or as if he cares about them in any way. This is maybe horrifying to behold, but it's really true. Police officers don't. The vast majority of them don't live their lives this way. That's why you don't just need police officers, but you need video cameras on police officers and investigators looking for corruption within the police force and so on. None of these values are universal. Put it this way. Communists believe that their ideals are a future utopia. Nihilists assume that our lack of ideals are the reality here and now beneath the veneer of ideology. So this is a different view of society where, look, our views have analytical and explanatory power, that none of these values are universal, that you can't arrive at universal claims, and that at any given time, so for one generation in Japan, politicians made excuses for child pornography, and then a different generation of leaders took over and they felt differently about it and so on. And this is how it is. Whether you talk about gay rights or kind of any of, it's not universal. You can stand up and make a speech that gay rights are universal human rights. Not in Saudi Arabia, and not even 50 years ago in Canada. Not 50 years ago in Canada. So there's nothing universal about it, but sure, it's a convenient fable to try to tell people. Yeah, so I don't see that as problematic, the lack of what's universal. I had a debate recently with a guy from India. That's right, he was Hindu. I was just going to say I wasn't sure if he was Hindu or Muslim, but no, it came up. He was Hindu. So a Hindu guy from India. And I said to him, not quite the same example about cow milk. So he's Hindu. Cows have a special significance in general for most Hindus. And I said to him, look, do you really see nothing wrong if you visit a factory farm and you see a cow standing upright in a steel cage on a concrete floor underneath a steel roof in a shed, and that cow is going to live its whole life standing up and sitting down on that one spot until one day someone comes and slits his neck. You don't see anything wrong with this. You don't see anything absurd with it. And he dogmatically insisted, no, he said he saw nothing wrong with that. He thinks it's totally morally good and proper to raise cows this way for their whole lives, to basically be nothing but suffering, ending in this meaningless death to produce an economic value that destroys human health and destroys the environment and has all these other bad things. That was his position on that. Now, so I can't claim it's a universal conclusion to look at the reality of factory farming and say, hey, there's something wrong here. There's something irrational or revolting, a sense of disgust or absurdity. This is absurd. To have millions of cows standing in millions of sheds like this, right? That's not universal. But a large percentage of people respond to it that way. I'd say the same about child pornography. A large percentage of people respond to it this way. And I think we can organize an effective movement for social change out of that large percentage of people. But just self-critically, to give an example where I'm really in the minority, I see gambling as really wrong. I really see gambling as immoral. Like Las Vegas style gambling. People pay money into a machine or they pay for a credit. I see that as bad, in a word. That's not obvious to everyone. There are millions of people who see that as completely morally positive or good or harmless, right? So but obviously I've met other people who share my values who also just look at that same thing. And for them it's as obvious as drinking milk out of a cow's udder, that there is that kind of thing. So I don't claim any of these are universal, but I would claim that if even 10% of people feel the way I feel about cow milk and factory farming, that 10% of people can make a huge impact. Sure. And I think in reality we know it's more than 10%.
Well, I guess then this it stems from the realization that 90% of the people will never be vegan. Veganism will always be a minority phenomenon, and you basically admit that it's always going to be like that. And from this presupposition, you say, okay, how can I develop the most effective form of convincing argumentation that appeals to this minority?
And gay people will always be the minority. I don't think gay, whatever percentage they are, nobody I think is planning on the future. Nobody said we can wait until gay people become 51% of the population to have gay rights. It's not going to work for that, right? And some of the other examples. Who really cares about cigarette smoking, about eliminating cigarette smoking? Is it maybe 1% of people are passionate about this or care about it, say, hey, smoking cigarettes is really bad. And, the majority of people are just indifferent. It's not that they love tobacco, or very few people feel it's a civil right to be able to smoke tobacco. Some do. Some people feel that way, that you should really have the right to choose and smoke tobacco. But can you organize that minority and press for change to eliminate tobacco smoking in our society? And that's similar also because the campaigns to eliminate tobacco have science on their side and to some extent economics on their side. The government doesn't want to. The government doesn't want to have to spend all this money on lung cancer. This kind of thing. So disability and what have you. So that you're correct. That is how I see it. The only footnote is we're talking about the near future. Is it possible 300 years from now, 500 years from now, 1,000 years from now? Is it possible the majority of people will be vegan? 1,000 years from now? Yes, it's possible. But there's no reason. I've got a plan within my lifetime.
It will probably require some kind of ecological disaster or an apocalyptic event.
Well,
turn most of the people on Earth.
I wouldn't say. I think what has to change fundamentally is education. And sure, it's possible. So today, look, okay, I'll give this is a little bit philosophically interesting too. So I had a black friend in high school. One. I'm from Canada. We don't have that many black people. I had one black friend in high school, and I remember, she cared about politics. She was a bit of a political dissident or political activist type of person. And she often had very strongly held views about things she knew nothing about. So some things she knew about, that's why we're friends. But I remember she said to me, this is one, I have several examples with her. She said to me that the stars in the sky never moved, that constellations hadn't moved in thousands of years, that the stars remained static. And I said to her, I'm sorry, this is just scientifically not true. Don't you realize the solar system is always moving and the stars are moving and we have all this evidence of that? And no, 1,000 years ago, they were in a different position, and there's a whole department at the university that's about this, the relative positions of the stars, where you see them from the Earth. They have moved. This is proven science. That was really before the internet existed. Or at that time, it's just starting to exist. I'm not that old, but normal people like me did not have access to the internet. Today, if you had that conversation, you just say, look, just get out your phone or something, or get out your laptop computer, just go to Google, just check, have the stars remain static, look it up or something, Wikipedia, and you can check that. It definitely, in much less than 1,000 years, just within 20 years, we may be at a point where verifiable scientific facts that support veganism are so instantly available to everybody, something much better than Wikipedia that you can see by pressing your earring, this causes cancer, this causes heart attacks, where this kind of information is available so instantly and so ubiquitously. I can imagine that changing, and again, especially if the quality of education in schools and universities changes, I can imagine that giving a big impetus towards veganism.
Well, actually, there are some signs of that, especially in the scientific circles and between nutrition scientists, for example.
Yes.
Especially in Germany, you can already notice that veganism is kind of creeping into the mainstream and accepted view of healthy eating.
Yes.
especially with medical doctors in Germany. I think in the US maybe the situation is a bit different. Yeah, maybe it's not as mainstream there as it is in Germany. But
well, also I think you've seen this in Germany. In most of your, in Germany, if you buy a fridge or a dishwashing machine where there's a label on it about the ecological impact, like how much electricity does it use and maybe how much pollution.
Yeah.
So again, if that becomes a point where you can touch your ear or touch your glasses, you're buying something, and cow milk has an ecological impact rating of 76 based on air pollution, water pollution, energy use or something. And then next to it is soy milk. And soy milk, so again, that also, it can be quantified, and the quantification can become verifiable and accessible instantly. So, if you guys have watched my channel for a long time, I rarely say something this optimistic because I'm normally talking about the next 20 years. I'm gonna die, people. Like I'm not planning on living forever. I've got to organize vegan activism now. But if you ask about the next 300 years or next 1,000 years, I think some stuff like that will come along. And I just mentioned along with that, one of the changes I've seen in my lifetime, there's more and more sneering contempt for factual knowledge. There was a time when people were really impressed if you happened to know particular historical dates, particular facts, if you had things memorized. But now, because that kind of data can be accessed through the internet, there's less and less respect for that. So there will be disadvantages too in terms of culture of learning. Yeah. But I can see that spurring on,
Well, getting back to that,
sure.
The point of our discussion about belief and the sense of observe. Like, I guess the reason I kind of felt, let's say, unconvinced, it's because a little bit too vague. Like the idea, like to base our moral judgments or moral compass on such vague concepts as the sense of the absurd and the sense of disgust or whatever other sense. Like it feels more like as if you feel moral judgments, not perceive them or reason to them. Like I don't know, it kind of worries me on a basic level. I don't know why exactly, but I think it should be a lot more clear if you want to formulate it.
I think that morality is worrying. I mean, I think if you're being honest with yourself about morality and moral judgments, I think you should be worried. So we already said I was a teenager asking myself if I should murder someone because I knew for a fact this man was a pedophile and a rapist. And I knew he'd gotten away with it, and I knew he'd continue to get away with it because he was a judge. He was part of the system, and the whole system protected him. And I had to reason through cognitively what is the right thing for me to do or for me to not do. And hashtag spoilers, I decided not to do anything. And I really had to think through, what was the right decision here. Anyway, and I felt more pressure on me. I could say more about that. That's scary. That's worrying. And again, even if you read Shakespeare, even in Romeo and Juliet. Romeo and Juliet's about a lot of teenagers with knives and swords getting into knife fights, Tybalt dies and everything. For most of human history, you have teenagers making decisions about war and death and so on. And you're right, it's worrying. I think the more honest and accurate your moral philosophy is, the more worrying it's going to be, and the greater the dynamism of doubt is going to be. That we live with doubt and uncertainty and passion and feeling involved. Now, are there philosophers who claim to have constructed a reassuring rational rational edifice of universal reliable answers to these questions? Yes. For example, utilitarianism. And I think utilitarianism is a great example of why all of that approach is deeply flawed, misleading, dangerous, and wrong. And utilitarianism has I think, no influence in legislation or world politics. Right? This is one side of it. But one of the current schools of utilitarianism, they come to the conclusion that the way you ought to live your life is to become a high-powered executive, banker, or stockbroker. That you should try to earn as much money as possible and then donate as much money as possible to charity. They call it earn to give. This is their new model of the moral ideal. this is absurd to me in many ways, but they come to this through a cold, clinical, formulaic style of reasoning. They think they're trading in moral certainties, But all those systems of moral certainty are a joke to me, right? I mean, okay, so look, if you just think about a society that's a little bit detached from you, okay, so Saudi Arabia, despicable social system, despicable government, despicable culture and religion, if we're being all the way honest. And if I'm born wealthy in Saudi Arabia, you're telling me the best thing I can do is get a high-paying job, maybe as an oil company executive, maybe in finance or banking, and give to charity. That fits perfectly into a Muslim society. This is, zakat and so on culture. It would be very well regarded. You can move up the social system. You can be a 100% conformist and not question anything your parents did or anything your society did. And the Saudi government can keep abducting people off the street and putting them into ghost houses and assassinating dissidents with snipers on rooftops. And you have no problem with it because you're a utilitarian who believes in earn to give. So that's Saudi Arabia today. Okay, how about the United States when slavery still existed? Does utilitarian No, it makes no sense. We live in a world with, again, sense of absurdity. I mean, what did I just do? The subtext of what I'm doing is I'm appealing to your sense of absurdity. Isn't it absurd to think you're making the world a better place by being a conformist and a banker and an oil executive? I mean, the oil industry, again, is immoral and ecologically flawed in its way, too. And think you're making the world a better place because you're going to earn all this money, live in luxury, and give money to charity. Now, I understand the appeal. I understand why some people want to believe that. But again, I'm pointing in challenging it here. I'm actually not appealing to your faith. I'm not appealing to your belief in some other ideal. I'm actually only appealing to this limited use of reason that's going to show a fissure that's going to appeal to your sense of absurdity. And again, Corey, it'd be even more absurd if we use Nazi Germany or something. So if you're alive in Nazi Germany, are you just going to earn as much money, conform with the social and political system, and give money to charity? What are you going to say when the Holocaust is over? Well, I gave 40% of my income to charity. Maybe I gave 60% of my income to charity. So yeah, and look, my set of ethical principles I know is not universal, but I don't feel that it's only people born in Nazi Germany or born in Saudi Arabia who have the weight of history on their shoulders, the weight of for me as a Canadian, the weight of genocide on their shoulders, the moral guilt of being part of an immoral society, of if you conform, being a conformist in an evil society. I feel that way about Canada too. It's true in Canada it may be more subtle than being in Nazi Germany or being in Saudi Arabia, but yeah, I do feel that way. So, universal, rational, ethical principles are reassuring, and they're all the more dangerous for that reason. I would rather live with that doubt, and I even, preach to others. Sure, get upset. Find it. Sorry, you didn't say you found it upsetting. I'm sorry, you found it. I forget which word you used, but you found
maybe
it
worrying.
Yeah, worrying. Right.
It's also upsetting.
Right. But be worrying. Be worried. I think that's quite appropriate. Yeah.
I think you have to assume that human nature is fundamentally good, or there's some goodness there that you are depending on. Yeah. Okay. Great.
If
you really want to adopt this, and preach this philosophy.
So it's a great point. I think the exact opposite is true. I think that if you're Catholic or communist or utilitarian, if you believe in an absolute ethical system, you therefore need to believe that everyone is good or most people are good. I can flip it around for you. What percentage of people are cocaine addicts or heroin addicts in a city like Vancouver or in Toronto? Now, as a percentage, it's not that many people. What percentage of people are alcoholics in countries where alcohol is available everywhere? Even let's extend video game addicts. How many people are addicted to video games? Video games are available everywhere. Some. Whether it's 1% or 5% or 10% of people, it's a percentage of people. I don't believe that human nature is universally good. I don't believe any of these things. I don't believe, period. My system is not based on belief. However, it should be empirically obvious to everyone that many people, at least 10% of people reject and shun alcohol, cocaine, heroin, video games, right? Some people are like that. Whether it's 5% or 10% or 30%, some. And for us, I count myself in this category, what are we going to do? No, it is not given to everyone to take up the work of government. It is not given to everyone to take up the work of research. It is not given to everyone to take up the work of charity. My father had 9 children. 9 children. I have 8 brothers and sisters. I don't think even one of them can do what I do. Not even, we have a lot of genetic material in common, right? I don't think I'm in the majority. I don't think I ethically or politically represent the majority. But this is like when I talk about genocide and Cree and Ojibwe, but even if we talk about Chinese or Cambodia or something, not everyone can care about political reality. Yeah. There are some people in California, and all they will ever care about is getting high and skateboarding. Using drugs to get high and then skateboarding or riding a bicycle for fun. That's their whole life. I'm not trying to recruit them into politics, research, and charity. I'm not. And look who turns up. I mean, so right now I just happen to have met you. Sorry, I mean, a little bit of work, but this is, my channel is sitting there. What kind of person gets interested in this, failed former scholar of Buddhism, former, kind of charity worker, political science major. So my channel is talking about some of these themes. Some people are going to get interested in what I have to offer and the challenge I'm making to the unexamined life of getting stoned and riding your skateboard every day. You look right now tomorrow. He's only 21. He could decide to spend the rest of his life getting stoned or using drugs and riding a skateboard. I don't think I think if you did, you would be miserable. Someone else would be happy. There were tons of people who were happy in Adolf Hitler's dystopia. They didn't mind. They didn't care. They did not, and a lot of them were alcoholics, probably. Alcoholism was pretty high in Germany at that time. They closed the window and drank more whiskey or drank more schnapps. Whatever kind of alcohol they were into, what they got on with their lives, right? So no, this is the thing. When I'm not making claims that are universal about human nature or even human potential. I don't think my own brothers, I don't think they have the potential. For shit. I mean, and so there's a range of intelligence amongst my brothers and sisters, but one of my brothers is so retarded, he's never said a word in any language. He can't even speak English. He can't speak any language. He's that severely retarded. So, I'd like to think I'm at the opposite extreme, but maybe I'm in the middle of the spectrum. Maybe we should be optimistic. Maybe the spectrum goes a lot higher. If so, you people are not on YouTube. The people on the upper end of the spectrum, come on, put me to shame. You make better YouTube videos about philosophy, politics, and veganism. Yeah, but no. So there's nothing universal about it. But for those who have that potential, I've got to reach out to them and ask, can we do more? And a lot of the time, so especially when I talk to older people, let's say you're talking to a professor of political science. Someone who thinks they've devoted their life to doing something morally good, through politics. And you say to them, why do you wear leather shoes? Why do you wear the chopped up pieces of a dead animal? Then they've never thought about it. Well, you talk about ecology or you talk about these things. So there are ways. The people who already are in some sense committed to trying to make a positive difference in the world, again, whether that's through politics or research or charity, or art. I mean, very rarely in my life, but maybe you talk to someone who's committed to the arts and making a positive change. I think that's, these are people who can be mobilized. Yeah, sure.
So summing up your view, as I understood it, you basically say that the people who bring forth moral change in society are like a very small minority of elites, kind of an elitism.
Okay.
What you said implicates some kind of elitism, yeah? And those are the only people who matter. And you formulate your kind of arguments and philosophy based on how you can best address this class of people and convince them.
So it's a good challenge in my view, but I do disagree with this characterization. So when I say people are a minority, that doesn't make them elite. It just means there aren't that many of them. So you could have these characteristics and be born poor. You can be black or white. You can be of any ethnic group, and again, even within your own family. And believe me, there's nothing genetic about it, and so on. I don't even know. Do you have brother? You have one brother, right?
I have one brother and two sisters.
Okay, so all right, so that's you have enough diversity in your family, and I'm sure they're going to take very different paths in life from you. I'm sorry, I don't want to get into this, but I just say within a given family. So for one thing, no, it's not an elite. For another thing, you're talking about a minority of people that choose themselves. Nobody else chooses them or appoints them, and you're also talking about a minority that anyone can exit at any time. At any time, you can go back to. You can choose to go use drugs and ride your skateboard. You can go to the unexamined life. You can get rid of all your moral responsibility. We could go back to eating meat tomorrow. And the reasons why we're not going to include disgust, include a sense of the absurd, include a sense of reason, include these kind of negative indicators. Again, you notice I'm not using the word virtue. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But, you can construe it, you can turn it inside out and express this in terms of positive virtues, which is also a valid way to describe it, sure. But like the number one reason, I mean, if I tried to eat meat tomorrow, I'd be disgusted. And it's partly because of what the meat means. I would be disgusted also to be putting mercury into the ocean, smashing mercury containers, these many other examples, I in a sense I know what it means, or at least I know what it means to me, and there's a very powerful relationship there that has an almost instinctual form of disgust and revulsion that comes in it. So no, sorry, but just to answer your question, in saying that it's a minority of people, I don't mean that it's an elite. They could be primarily oppressed and poor people, depending on the country and the culture, and the people who are born in Saudi Arabia and look around them and say, this is absurd, this has to change. They can be at any social class, same with Iran and so on. So this sense of challenging the values and assumptions you were raised with, I think it can arise spontaneously, kind of almost anywhere, with almost any kind of person. And if any, I would say probably people who are born rich are probably at a disadvantage, because they have so many rewards for conforming and not questioning, in the culture and milieu that they're in. They have so many rewards. So, I mean, there are rich people who get involved in politics, but they're involved in politics not to change anything, just to keep things the same, or just to make more money or what have you. I mean, sorry. Shout out to George W. Bush. I would guess, if anything, there's a bit of an inverse relationship to the privilege you're born with. That'd be my guess.
But don't you think that it's exactly because of this realization, that most people will not be part of this minority, that universal or absolutist values, like the ones that religions offer or other ideologies, are on a purely pragmatic level useful in society and do play an important role. Can you really just rely on this sense for the majority of people in society to lead them to the right moral decisions in their lives? This
right, sure. No. I believe right. No, it's a totally good question. But I'm not a libertarian. I don't believe in. So your phrasing was good there. He asked, "Do you believe you can leave people to make these moral decisions in their lives?" And my answer to that is no. So a great example: circumcision or genital mutilation. People paying for a surgeon to use a knife and mutilate the penis of a boy or the vagina of a girl. This is very common in Muslim countries. It's also common in Judaism and in some forms of Christianity. This is a worldwide faith-based phenomenon. If you have the attitude to just leave people to make their own decisions to this, no, I don't believe in that at all. I think that some minority of people, just the same with cigarette smoking, if you just leave people to smoke cigarettes, more than 10% of people are going to keep smoking cigarettes. I don't know. It's going to vary. Maybe in some countries it's 50%, in some countries, but millions of people are going to keep smoking. So no, how do you get rid of smoking? Public education, But sure, to some extent, government enforcement and regulation and posters, and I think there are all kinds of ways you can guide society to quit smoking. I would prefer not to have the army enforcing this. I'd prefer to do it in nonviolent ways. But sure, ultimately, there is a kind of coercion involved. And when I was a kid in Canada, there were actually questions about how would the school treat students who smoked cigarettes? Because, could they actually be punished? Or was this in effect like a civil right where the students were allowed to smoke cigarettes in certain? So there are difficult decisions to make. But no, so with circumcision, I would completely support, in effect, the minority of the population who are not an elite, they're going to be spread all over the place, wherever they are, who wake up and realize this is barbaric and this is harmful. You're harming infants. You're doing damage to people biologically. To wake up and get organized and hope, preferably through a democratic process, pass a law and end this, in the country. Of course, it's better to do it through public education. It's better to do it in a participatory way. But ultimately, no, I do believe in coercion. And for me, the perfect example is water pollution. I don't believe you have the right to dump anything in the water, but not your poo, not your sewage, not your paint. You're finished painting your house, you pour the paint in the water. No. I totally believe in, of course, public education would help. People may not realize throwing paint in the water is a really serious form of pollution. Education and so on is definitely important. But ultimately, yeah, enforcement, sure. Yeah, there's going to be a minority of people in government who make that decision, or a minority of people who care about it and lobby on it. The same way gay rights was a minority movement. I think it benefits the majority, but it's totally a minority movement.
Yeah. I think, how do you reconcile this view with your rejection of using violence as a means of bringing forth the socialist or communist ideals and realize them in a society? Like how do you reject government-sponsored violence or coercion and reject it in other situations? Where do you draw the line? Or is it just a pragmatic, does it just depend on the situation? Like you're with government intervention and coercion if it serves a perceived public good, and how do you define it? This is I don't know, this is kind of a murky situation you put yourself in if you don't have any problem with government coercion, or I don't know if you can call it violence, but I think it is under the threat of violence.
Right,
you can at least say that.
Sure. Yeah, if you'll go to jail if you pollute the river.
How can you justify it in this context, of your other views on communism and socialism and rejection of violence, generally in political activism, for example? Why do you say the government can do it, but also individuals or maybe vegan activists or
I think right. No, but I think
because they also believe that they're doing something good, for the public good.
Right. Well, no, I mean, my basic, in this sense, I'm a mainstream Democrat, not in the American sense, but a mainstream person who believes in democracy. I think it's fine for a government, almost any kind of government, to come together and have public consultations and debates and a vote and decide, for example, that you have to force children to brush their teeth with fluoride. That this is something we can do collectively. Now, I just put in a footnote. How perfectly democratic is that? How collective is it? Do you really just have a dictatorship that symbolically goes around and consults people, or is it truly democratic? That's a very important question, but we set that aside now. But so just finish the example. I believe in this democratic conceit, and no, I do not believe in grassroots violence or any non-government, any public minority, anyone, special interest group using violence, which would be in this case, let's say a group of dentists get together and they decide they're going to go around in a group and enforce their idea of dental hygiene, that they're going to show up and terrorize schools, or that they're going to use, again, it would be low-level violence, but that they're going to go around and in a agit-prop, rebellious, terroristic manner go around trying to force people to start using proper toothpaste with fluoride in it and so on. No, I don't. So to me, these two things are totally different. But I think what you're really asking is do I believe that the state use of force, that government use of force, well, you could put it two ways. One, is it always democratic? No. Of course, sometimes it's democratic, sometimes it's not. And then two, is it always right, whereas the public use of force is always wrong? So no, and again, so in both these things, I am a nihilist. I mean, empirically, no, I don't assume that. There are going to be cases where the government is horribly wrong. And
but why should it be democratic if it's only a minority of people?
Yeah.
Usually who have this moral
Right.
conviction.
Well,
that you,
right,
that
no,
you want
right,
to
right,
impose as
no,
a law.
right. No,
Society.
that's
why should it be
right.
democratic?
No, that's a very good question. But I think for me the answer is a part of the question. The obligation on that enlightened minority is precisely to convince the majority, or to convince the plurality of whoever is involved in the political process. So I mean, in Canada, I mentioned this example recently, but back in the 1980s, so I was already alive in the 1980s, there really was a public discourse about whether or not it was acceptable for a homosexual man to be employed as a school teacher. Because at that time there was prejudice and apprehension and fear. Basically the fear was that any gay man who was a school teacher would be trying to have sex with students, or would be engaged in something like pedophilia or pederasty, something along those lines. And that was a very, very difficult debate to have, where people had to stand up and say, no, being a homosexual is different from being a pederast or a pedophile. It is different from, not having the lack of professionalism to have sex at the office or whatever your job is. These issues, they really had to be talked through. So the process of, if you like, Socratic dialogue, of building your case, of reasoning through and debating those policies, that is massively important, and you generally will not get that in a military dictatorship or a monarchist regime. I don't know, you can come up with some examples of military dictatorships that had some kind of public consultation process. But I think implicit in what you're asking is, though, is this really a process of convincing the majority, or is it just a process of convincing the minority of people who control government? The reality in every country I know in the real world today, it's a process of convincing the minority of people who control government. And again, a great example would be something like seatbelts. There was this struggle in the United States, and then most countries copy them. Should seatbelts for safety in cars, should that be mandatory? Should it be universal? Should you force car companies to include this feature? And they never convinced 100% of people. I don't think they convinced 51% of people. But they convinced people inside the government in Washington, D.C., in the United States. And of course they had scientific facts and statistics and so on. So that's the reality in the real world.
But I think I can give you a lot of historical examples that falsify these views. For example, in the Middle East, there was a period where enlightened dictators, secular dictators, ruled in the Middle East. Right. Some of them are still ruling the Middle East right now. Even in Iran, the Shah, for example, or other kings and monarchs throughout the Middle East, or military dictators try to impose some sort of secular. Even in Syria, like the Assad regime, they tried to impose some kind of
early Saddam Hussein, first half of Saddam Hussein's career,
They tried to impose some kind of secular Western values, Western in some aspects, and not others, but they tried to do that. Some more successful than others, but you can see the backlash. So for example, in Iran, in the Iranian Islamic Revolution, what happened? Like, you can still see the
I just mentioned I did actually study these examples in university, so I think I'm pretending. I actually formally studied the history of this back at University of Toronto in 1999. No, actually it would have been 2000 and 2001. It was just before September 11th. But anyway,
And I think you can obviously see that it didn't work. Like the amount of resentment that people felt for the elite secular Western governing circles, like it was immense, and it also caused the resentment of secularism and democracy itself, because they got associated with the foreign traitor, the collaborator with Western powers, with the colonial powers, and I think this is a major example where this approach didn't work at all, especially with very delicate and sensitive issues that are very deeply connected with religion and moral values and culture. It's not about just seatbelts and automobile
well,
companies.
It is like homosexuality though, because that's also very linked to religion and culture.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Maybe it doesn't work all the time, but
but again, I don't claim. See, again, I claim that nihilism is not a future utopia. Nihilism is the reality beneath the veneer of ideology here and now. This is I agree. These are exactly as you say. These are failures. But to me, this kind of affirms my hypothesis. Doesn't challenge it. So another failure in many ways is democracy in China. By the way, the whole of China and the failure of democracy there is another instructive example. But look, I can ask you this question. So in Iran, or we could use many other examples, but anyway, to take Iran as an example, is it better for the progress of Iran to be achieved through, let's say, public education, cultural transformation of the masses, and then transformation of the government after this transformation has taken place? Or is it better to impose a dictatorship with a different sense of values and then have the violence of that dictatorship impose that change on the people? Now, I'm simplifying the situation by only giving you two options. Because of these two options, there's a whole list of gray areas in between where most of real human history happens. Look, even within the history of England, cultural changes that happen in England and so on, you do get a lot of these questions of how do you impose cultural change, even linguistic change. Even achieving literacy or creating a single national language instead of having local regional languages. To some extent, there's a carrot, and to some extent, there's a stick. To some extent, there's democracy and public participation. To some extent, there's a level of coercion. Even if the coercion is, look, if you want to join the army, if you want to get a government job, if you want to qualify for this, then you have to have learned this language or done this thing or conform to these values, whatever they are in some way. These kinds of impetuses. Now, so sorry, I asked this question. I assume your answer is not that you would prefer to have, a brutal dictatorship enforcing change from the top down.
Not, if it's possible.
Right. And the problem is time, right? The problem is, do we have 100 years, right? That's real. For veganism also, it's a question. Do we have 100 years to do this grassroots, from the bottom up? And the problem is also commitment to a place. Now, why do I say this? Right now, Canada will accept 100% of refugee applicants, basically from all. That's our principle in Canada. Anyone who is a homosexual in Iran or Saudi Arabia can come to Canada. They merely need to say the word refugee, and then they can ask for a translator. They don't need to speak English. And then they can explain that they're a homosexual and they're oppressed in their native country, and they will be granted permanent residency in Canada.
Do you even need to demonstrate that you're actually homosexual? Can anyone claim that he is? How does it even work?
You know the answer. You don't need to. That's correct. You do not need to prove anything. So that is also a source of tension. It's rare that people make fake claims about being gay, but there are other claims to being a refugee. Many people do fake, and there's evidence of this. So no, this is also a question. Now look, I mentioned this as an extreme example. Other people, right now, democracy in Cambodia. So in case you don't know, Cambodia has an ocean border, but it's mostly land borders. If you live in Cambodia and you want democracy, are you going to risk your life and struggle for democracy? Or are you going to walk to Thailand? You can literally walk to Thailand and go live there and have a better life there, And Laos. I used to live in Laos. At some points in time, we've had more Lao people living outside of Laos than inside of Laos. When life is bad in Laos, they all leave and go to Thailand. You can just walk to Thailand, You cross the border and get work there in a factory or on a farm. Economically, you lead a better life. So again, this is not being a refugee. This is just being a migrant worker or something.
Yeah.
So, and now that is a problem that existed to a very, very limited extent 300 years ago. To some extent, people could migrate and leave and so on. And now it's a huge factor. And then beneath that, you can stay in the same country, but just check out mentally, right? You can keep living in Malaysia, but every day watch movies from Japan, read books from Japan, watch pornography from Japan, maybe get an internet girlfriend, who's in Japan, talk to people on the internet in Japanese. You can stay where you're living and just live a fantasy life of video games, and maybe drugs and alcohol help too. You can just disengage from reality. Obviously that always existed to some extent historically. But yeah, there are a lot of things that can pull people away from this. So, commitment to a place, that's an irrational aspect of political science that's normally taken for granted. And we now have to think much more nihilistically about. We have to question that. Who really has an attachment? I don't even mean a country, to a town, to a city, where when the local economy collapses, they say, no, I'm going to stay here and work hard and build a better future for this town. That kind of commitment. When the government is corrupt, they say, okay, I'm going to stay here and fight corruption, even if it takes years of my life and costs me a lot of money and makes me corrupt. Because, even within Canada, it's a huge issue. Local government is corrupt. Who cares? If you can just move somewhere else, if you can just ignore it and go somewhere else, these other things. And yeah, I think you probably feel that. The diaspora from almost every, right now, Syria, huge numbers of people are leaving Syria. They're not going to stay and fight for democracy in Syria. This has been happening for so many years and so on. So this is a phenomenon. Whether they're refugees or migrants, not all of them have formal refugee status. And of course it's appealing. Whether they escape from Syria to Canada or just from Syria to Jordan or Lebanon, they may go a short distance. But this is a huge vector now. Yeah.
How much time do you have?
I'm not running out.
So I can go on?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
Next question.
Yeah.
I am very exhausted and very jet lagged, but I feel this is all I can do now. I'm not going to start studying Chinese in this condition, so I'd rather talk about politics. Great.
I'm enjoying listening to it, even though I'm exhausted.
Right. For my girlfriend Melissa, this is a live YouTube video.
So, I guess this connects to our. It's basically the same topic, but how much democracy and let's say elitist oligarchy or government do you like to see in a specific government? Because you said that democracy is fundamentally unequal. You said in a video that's you want to see a democracy that's or democracy is a representative government of the poor because they are the majority. But at the same time,
so that's actually not why. I'll tell you after. Continue your question.
But at the same time, as we mentioned earlier, we said that positive moral change, at the end, there has to be somewhat enforced from this governing elite from above.
Right.
Like, how do you reconcile those two views? It's kind of hard to see.
Okay, good. So, good question. But for me, it is an easy question to answer. This isn't to me a kind of unexpected or hard to answer question at all. I want government to be for the poor, not because the poor are the majority. In Canada, I don't think the poor are the majority. Maybe 20% of people in Canada. Maybe it's 30%. It's how we define it, but it's way less than 50%. So, but in Canada, depending on it may be 10%. I mean, not that Canada's a very rich country, but you just came from Luxembourg. You came through Luxembourg.
Yeah,
sorry. Yeah. You were in Luxembourg for a few hours, but some people have theorized almost nobody in Luxembourg is poor. Like they have a very tiny number of people who are poor. It's one of the wealthiest countries, but also one of the least poor. So they have a very, very small number of poor. The poor are a small minority there. So it's not now. Of course, it's a question what percentage of people are poor in China, but Laos or Cambodia. I've lived in countries where definitely the majority are poor. So sometimes the poor are a majority, and sometimes they're a minority. It is not because the poor are the majority that I want government by the poor and for the poor. It's because the poor are the people who need government help, who need government infrastructure. So, I mean, even in the example of, so let's say you have a train system. The train system, it doesn't really matter if it works well for the rich. Now, if it does, that's nice. Like, it's nice if there's a first-class carriage where rich people can drink champagne. You can have a swimming pool on the train, so rich people can pay extra, pay $100 and go swimming. You can have a sauna. I don't care. That doesn't really matter for society. But it's tremendously important that you have seats on the train that are so cheap or subsidized that an unemployed poor person looking for a job can take the train from city to city and go and do job applications or go and get government benefits or go to the hospital, right? Now, again, like hospitals, sorry, I could go on with a million examples. If hospitals don't work for the rich, they have alternatives, they have options, they have ways to cope because they have money.
Yeah.
The poor need those government services. Now, I can say this to some extent about education, et cetera, et cetera. It is a little bit different. It's not really the same for education as it is for a train service. But broadly speaking, you get my point. Now, I have never known in the history of the world a society where the rich were so marginalized and voiceless that we really had to worry about them not being, that the government ignored them. The government just doesn't care about the millionaires who own factories. Their voices not being heard in government. But I mean, it's theoretically possible. It's pretty close to theoretically impossible. So this is the issue of the government emphasis on the poor. But as I've already said, the poor may be a minority. They may be a small minority in a very successful democracy. Now, the other type of minority you're talking about ultimately are the people who care. So, if you have an open public consultation, if you have an open democratic process with a series of meetings to discuss sewage treatment, how is the government going to build a new sewage treatment plant? We just had this in Victoria, the city I live in Canada, and way back in the year 2000, I was involved in that democratic process in Toronto when the city of Toronto was planning a new, it was called the wastewater management plan. Wastewater sounds nicer than poo management plan, right? Who comes to the meeting? I do. I'm the kind of person who comes. I care about ecology. I care about politics. I care about those things. But if you don't force people to go against their will, that is going to be a minority of people. Now, I think actually there are questions of maybe not forcing people, but incentivizing people, creating a culture and even an economy where there are enough positive incentives that, maybe you have to have a minimum where you say, look, if we don't have 10% of people participating in this, we're not going to make the decision at all. Look, we have to have a certain percentage of the public really involved in this process. Otherwise, we're not going to commit $10 billion to this because the costs of these decisions can be huge. Yeah. Maybe there is. In ancient Athens, they would pay a salary to people. They would pay 3 obols a day for you to come to an important public meeting and 1 obol a day if it was a less important meeting. So you would get paid a little bit of money to come and spend all day. Now, there are other things involved. There is a role of intelligence and education involved, but these people are going to choose themselves. I've sat down and gone through technical documents about air pollution, water pollution, and stuff. And when I was in Cambodia and Laos, they were different. In Laos, I got deeply involved in government policy on rubber farming, on the different types of agriculture and farming the government's making. I'm not an expert in agricultural engineering, and you're not either. Trust me, you're smart enough to sit down and read that stuff. And part of it is when you see something you don't understand, going and finding a book, going and looking it up, figuring out what's going on here, being able to scrutinize the statistics. So you don't need to be an expert in agriculture or sewage treatment or anything, but you need to be someone with a kind of public spirit and sense of responsibility and curiosity and verve and tenacity. And not everybody can care about every issue, right? So in saying a minority of people are going to care, that ultimately a minority of people are going to be involved in the decision, I don't mean the rich or the poor. I mean that when you have real democracy, not everyone is going to be committed on every issue. Now, is that a problem? yes, gay rights, as an example, 2 types of people in Canada were highly motivated about gay rights. People who were gay themselves and the Catholic Church. And they were on opposite ends. So at that time, I mean, I don't remember Islam being a major player in Canada. We have a lot of Catholics in Canada. We didn't at that time have very many Muslims, but I'm sure also, conservative Muslims had a position on it and so on. So, one of the problems is when you involve too small a percentage of the public, you're going to get the polarization of special interests and not a representation of the broader society. There are factors to be managed there. Okay, does that answer your question? Because for me, you ask a good question, but I don't feel it's contradictory or difficult for me. Yeah.
I just wanted to know, like, the underlying unifying philosophy. Like, sometimes I just get bits and pieces of your views and just want to connect them. Yeah. Right. But so I like it. It's a kind of a cynical view of human nature and in politics.
It's. But look, the best thing in life is when those minorities can choose themselves. When people can choose themselves. So even something like museums and art, you cannot leave questions about art in the hands of people who happen to be born rich, which in most societies is what it is. Someone is born rich, their great-grandfather bought many paintings. Maybe they have paintings, like here in Europe, there are people, their great-grandfather bought paintings and put them in a castle. And now here they are today, and they don't care about art, whatever, and they're in this powerful position in the art world. They have money, they have an old collection of paintings, and they're going to be influential that way. How does the public, how does a democracy make questions about art, answer questions about art that really affects the public and that involve millions and millions of dollars of taxpayers' money? Tremendous costs with tremendous long-term consequences. That's a situation where it's so fundamentally elitist in its bias, even aristocratic in its bias, that it's very hard to create a meaningful democratic, process that'll involve people. And where, definitely the vast majority of the poor, they don't care. They don't think it's their issue. They're not going to be motivated even in the same way they may be motivated on gay rights or something. Yeah. So these are challenges. Yeah. These are. Sorry, you say. Sorry, I was pointing to you saying it's a cynical view of human nature. Again, all the ancient Greeks, they start from this assumption that when people get involved in politics, they are pursuing their self-interest. Yeah. Their interest as a person or as a class. But you're an example of this. So you used to think about veganism in terms of your health, which is one kind of self-interest, and then it broadened. You started thinking about it in terms of ecology and in terms of politics. It's all self-interest. But you've become more and more enlightened in your self-interest, and your self-interest is aggrandizing and involves other people in the whole world, your whole country. Takes on these other dimensions. Yeah, so self-interest is not necessarily narrow and is not necessarily destructive or focused on your own entertainment or something.
Yeah. I sense John Adams behind the statement.
Well, I'm okay. All right.
Yeah.
All right. Do you have more of that, or do you have the question on the list?
I think I exhausted the topics I wanted to ask you about. Yeah.
Okay. So let me ask you a question. Yeah. You're at a turning point in your life. You're now 21. So 5 years from now, you're going to be 26. It's one of the questions I like to ask people. What do you think you are going to do? Not what you can do. What do you think you will do? What do you think is going to happen for you and the future of the vegan movement?
It's a difficult question. Like, I still don't know what I can do. Like, in the context of a vegan movement. Like because I'm involved in science and research right now, and I'm pursuing a career in scientific research, and for that also in Germany. Yeah, so I'm not sure if I'm going to be politically active, as you are.
No,
although I'm seeking it. Like, I'm searching for the options and what
but
lies ahead.
I think we both know there is a way to be a kind of scientist activist or be active within science. Yeah.
But I've spent so much time like just concentrating on the science.
Yeah.
And I didn't read and explore like my options as a scientist enough. I think at this point to really like know what the options are for me as an aspiring political activist in there.
Right.
And the other issue is that I'm not sure if I want to be merely an activist in the like in the vegan scene. Like
sure,
I was my political concerns were always broader and more related to human affairs than like veganism.
Right.
But like the vegan aspect got more and more important in the last couple of years, I guess.
Yeah.
So I'm still sorting out. Like I really don't have a coherent view of my future or what I want to do.
Let's say that
what I can do.
Veganism is certainly unique in that it is possible for you to, directly apply the sciences to, or look, I mention this example all the time. Educating the public about leather, the biochemistry of leather, of how it's produced, of the pollution in rivers, the negative effects on the employees, the leather workers, the people who make the leather. In theory, the negative health effects, even on the person who wears the leather and keeps it in their home. Leather gives off chromium hexane into the air, and then you breathe it. This is straight biochemistry, and I do not have the expertise to talk about that. So I mean that's an example of something where within your expertise you could do it, and so I think that's something maybe exciting for someone in the sciences. On the other hand, obviously I understand what you're saying. There's this sphere of real politics, so we say war politics, electoral politics, which seems to have so little common ground with veganism. Yeah.
Like, and it's also some kind of a fear of commitment to a specific, a very narrow and specifically defined kind of activism.
Yes.
Because it takes time and it's risky, and if you commit yourself for a number of years, it's pretty hard to just choose something else and then switch. And especially I know about your experience.
Yes.
And they really made me think twice and be a lot more careful when deciding for my future decisions about career and pathway and the role I want to play in politics and this veganism or other issues.
No, I mean I think the responsibilities you adopt become your identity. So I mean it's not having a kid that makes you a father. It's worrying about your kid.
Yeah.
It's the responsibility you adopt, and you don't. You become a father. It becomes part of your character. You become a parent, and in the same way, you take on a responsibility for veganism, or let's say you take on responsibility for Syrian refugees. You start a charity. You're doing some work with resettling and helping Syrian refugees, or any possible political commitment like that. And it does become part of who you are, or part of who you are perceived to be, at least, in a very dynamic way. And I think it kind of contaminates everything else you've got going on in your life. So, but wait, I just want to answer one more thing there on that exact issue of commitment. I never would have become a vegan activist. If my other aspirations had been more successful, right? So just a couple years ago, I was trying to be an activist for Cree and Ojibwe, for Indigenous peoples of Canada, and as languages. So really language education and cultural and political change attached to Indigenous peoples of Canada, Cree and Ojibwe, Algonquian languages. That's what I wanted to do politically with the rest of my life. I wanted to be a vegan guy, a guy who happened to be vegan. I wanted to be vegan, but involved in politics of political reform, education reform, the future of Canada minus genocide, a non-genocidal future of Canada. So that's what I wanted to do. And when that failed, veganism became my primary political identity and primary activism. And for those of you who don't know, it's taking over my life in a very real way now, because now I'm going to actually get a degree in cuisine as a baker and get involved with vegan food as a platform for activism. It's because I'm just going into that.
Yeah.
And that contaminates everything else I do. That becomes my identity. Yeah, you become a father, But even more, you become a baker. That's who you are to other people. That's how they perceive you.
I can definitely relate to that because, the initial driving factor that caused me to get into like biochemistry and studying some science at university is that I spent so much just individually on my own initiative studying and researching like biology, evolution, molecular biology, biochemistry in the context of the creation evolution debate.
Really?
That was going on in Jordan, back in Jordan.
Yeah.
And I don't know how exactly, but through an atheist friend who challenged my views back when I was still a typical Muslim creationist. Maybe when I was 15 or 16. I don't know. It was around that time. So it kind of got me spontaneously in this field, and I got drawn in and fascinated by molecular biology and genetics and so forth, and just and after 4 or 5 years I found myself at the level of a graduate student, and maybe not postgraduate, but kind of a graduate student who's been studying it for 3 or 4 years, and I just felt that I had to just go on with it, if I didn't do it, I just felt some kind of responsibility because I was aware of it. I could do it. I was interested in it, and because of the dismal state of science education in Jordan, especially because of that, and I felt some kind of responsibility. Maybe not a grandiose sense of responsibility, but kind of just for my surroundings.
Because education as activism or something.
Something like that. I'm still thinking about opening a kind of a scientific research institute or scientific research education institute, maybe there to improve the state of education and also the perception of the scientific method and the scientific way of thinking. It's pretty I don't think you can imagine. Maybe you can. You have a lot of experience. How poor the level of education there is, especially when it comes to the sciences and the humanities. Even worse. Forget about that. But I'm just talking about basic natural science. Maybe the engineering and then the medicine has a lot more for it because there's a lot of money and that. But natural science and humanities, it's very neglected there. And the level of education there is pretty poor.
But I think you'd agree also there's a change in the sense of social responsibility and political attitude when you shift from regarding human beings as angels missing wings to being biological creatures, or when you shift from regarding the soul as something primary and the body as secondary to regarding people as just biologically real accidents of evolution. Etc. When you switch from an essentialist view or a theistic view or magical view of what humans are and why they're on Earth and what are their functions, to realizing how haphazard. So I'll give you an example which is related to nutrition. Dogs don't need vitamin C. But we do, you know what I mean? Actually, the majority of land mammals don't need vitamin C, but it happens we do, you know what I mean? There's this different, who ended up in terms of the evolutionary chain, randomly. Many other mammals, including all the quadrupeds, can tolerate, including herbivorous quadrupeds like deer, can tolerate meat much better than we do and can even tolerate cannibalism, can engage in cannibalism better than we do. We happen to have a set of biological characteristics. Nobody planned it. We tolerate meat really poorly. We tolerate cannibalism very, very poorly. The health consequences for human cannibalism are really bad. But it's not, it's not a moral judgment on the part of a creator, So I just say, that's, I think that's a subtle and pervasive shift.
I think on some level, we rarely ever choose our roles we play in our life, and perhaps we take you have some choices, but they're very limited, and the limits are just put on you. What you can choose from is very limited at the end of the day, and you can't control that. You maybe can control between a couple of choices or 3 or 4, and you don't even know where that will lead you. In the end,
I think as you get older, I think that'll change. I think what you just said. I think that's really tragically true at age 13. At age 13, what are your choices? And to some extent, my choices were presented to me by things like Batman, Just cultural garbage that's, mainstream corporate stuff. Your ideas about the outside world are very limited. But as you get older, even in, say, age 13 versus age 23, the number of colors on your palette that you're painting with, you have more and more colors you can use. You have more and more objective experiences in the real world and examples you can draw from. And you start to have more and more of ability to generate your own cultural values, sui generis, to generate your own ideas, be they political or scientific or economic or what have you. But sure, back at age 13, I can remember saying, I'll give you two examples, okay? But I can remember saying to people in the schoolyard, it's not like this everywhere. In Singapore, things are really different. I knew a little bit about political reality in Singapore. It may not seem to you like Singapore is so shockingly different a society, but it is. Singapore was an example for me that way of a different society. This isn't human nature. This isn't universal. We can question. And even earlier I was saying, I think there are kids growing up in Malaysia, growing up in Indonesia in a Muslim culture, but they watch cartoons from Japan and they see a different society, and I think it doesn't have to be this way. So at an early age, I think you probably are mostly working from, examples of real world examples. I heard an interview with an Inuit man. So the Inuit live in the furthest north part of Canada. Some people still refer to them as Eskimo, but Inuit is the proper term. So they live in the ice and snow. And he talked about how amazingly bleak his life was until he happened to have a job where his coworker was a black American man, an African American man, from somewhere far to the south. I forget where he was from. Maybe he was from Florida, maybe he was from Chicago, but he was from a totally different climate. And, one of the things that guy explained to his coworker on the job when they were talking about life and politics, but he really explained to him, life is not like this everywhere. And if your whole life, all you have known is the frozen snow and peculiar political situation in Arctic Canada as, an Inuit person who at that time had a very strange, political and religious position in Canada, the government trying to force you to become Christian and so on, the policies of that time. I think it's true when you're younger, which is true. But as you get older, I think that the creative role you play in the creation of your own values increases, and the destructive role you can play in demolishing or disassembling what you've passively received from society, from your parents, from religion, I think that also increases a lot.
Yeah, but like in my experience, maybe that's not necessarily like a blessing always, because like when I was in Jordan, I was really like a lot more motivated than now, because I felt the direct like influence and role I had to play in society through studying this, through studying biochemistry, for example, and I could see the vacant niche I had to fill, and I had responsibility to fill. And here it's kind of very indirect, and like I can't see like the direct purpose of my original initial decision anymore, and that's what's caused my initial like loss of motivation and I don't know, sense of attachment to what I do here, like in the past year, since I came to Germany. But like I just told myself I had to move on, because I already put like 4 or 5 years in this in this field, and I I don't know like it's kind of a hard question. Do you just move on, go on because you already invested so much time in it, and it's kind of irresponsible to throw it away, or does it really like matter to have a direct connection like to the real world, to the reality on the ground, with what you want to do, with what you aspire to do? I don't know. It's a hard decision to make sometimes. But I'm just assuring myself that in the future, like when I get back, I'm gonna I'm gonna see the fruits of my labor. And
what is it? You're saying this about biochemistry,
for example,
but you're not saying it about veganism or something. I'm just saying, because this would be true for any commitment. But, the realization that your role and your responsibility is simply whatever you make it. I mean, it's simultaneously liberating and terrifying. That's right. You have no duty except the duty you take upon yourself. So your duty could be anything, but it's going to be something. And look, I said recently in one of the videos in passing, I said, look, I don't expect Wayne Xiong to speak Chinese. He's a Chinese American guy, just because his ancestry is Chinese. I don't want to learn Hebrew. Some of my ancestors are Jewish, but doesn't mean I want to learn Hebrew. I didn't inherit a responsibility to study Cambodia and the Cambodian language. My responsibility, my sense of duty and purpose was purely elective. It's something I took upon myself. But out of that came a tremendous sense of motivation, duty and purpose. So, and now, of course, it ended tragically. It was heartbreaking for me. I didn't inherit any sense of duty and purpose with Kriya or Ojibwe, nor veganism. You create it. So again, this is my sense of it being a blank canvas or a blank chalkboard. This is something where you are in the position of projecting these things. You don't receive duty from your parents or from the gods or what have you. And as I say, that is simultaneously liberating and empowering, but also terrifying. And it opens the door to you. You realize when you look at, say, the guy in California, someone in California who just uses drugs and rides a skateboard all day, you realize that could be me. There isn't an essential difference between us. There's a merely extrinsic difference and an elective difference. There's merely it's a superable obstacle. It's not an insuperable obstacle that divides us.
Like, how would you formulate this view? Would you say that people should do what they can do best, or in their lives, according to their skills and abilities, or do you think people could just do what seems to be their responsibility in that moment, even if they're not the best person to do that, or?
Well, yeah, I think that's something many people struggle with. What if you feel like your personal way to make the world a better place is architecture? Okay?
Yeah.
And then you commit to it, you try to do it. Let's say you're terrible at math, you're terrible at drawing, you really are bad at the geometry involved in architecture. Let's say you just lack the attention to detail. There's certain kinds of mental qualities you need as an architect or something, and you're just terrible at architecture. How would you know at the start of the process that this isn't your talent, this isn't your ability?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So no, you ask an interesting question, but I think you already know that nobody knows the answer. So Cambodia is a good example. How would I know if I can learn the Cambodian language? And I can try, but maybe it's actually impossible. For some, it's a very hard language to learn. For some people, it would be impossible. Or how would I know if Cambodian culture would even accept me? And I just mean in a limited sense, that I wouldn't be totally rejected and hated there as a foreigner and an outsider. Some guys are. I could give you some examples of why that is. Cambodian culture is very tolerant of homosexuals, but it's very...
Really?
Oh, yes. Yeah. But it's very intolerant of a man with long hair. That's totally unacceptable to them. So if you're... whether you're straight or gay, it doesn't matter.
Does that stem from their Buddhist culture, or...
Yes, but different cultures take Buddhism, the inspiration of Buddhism, in different directions. So, the Cambodian attitude towards homosexuality is totally different from the Japanese attitude or the attitude in Sri Lanka. It's even very different from Thailand and Laos. Mm-hmm. So, yeah, Buddhism is a huge factor in all these. But then, what the culture did with Buddhism is very different from one place to another. So I just mentioned... is it possible for me to do the kind of research I want to do in Cambodia, the kind of humanitarian work I want to do in Cambodia? Those questions, I can't know that when I'm starting to try. And again, we already used the example of sewage, sewers and sewage treatment and so on. Maybe I feel this is the way I can make a positive difference, and then I find out that it isn't. So that's a process of trying that leads to you learning about the society you live in and the political system, and learning about yourself. So I know it's to say a process of self-discovery is the most abused concept in the human language. Many of these YouTube channels are going to tell you to get on a process of self-discovery by using drugs or drinking alcohol or LSD or have sex with 30 people or some crap like this. Okay, okay. As long as it's under 300 people, okay. I actually do think there's a role for self-discovery there, but I don't know. I don't know about the numbers. I don't know about the quantity. Anyway, at some point, it's not self-discovery anymore, people. When you get to 100, we'll talk. I don't know. I don't want to put a number on that. But look, but in a very meaningful sense, I think it's a bit of a sickness in our culture that nobody thinks doing research, doing charity, doing humanitarian work, and doing direct political activism, like going to City Hall and lobbying on sewage systems, that's a process of self-discovery. But it is. Now again, for somebody it might be architecture, it might be something else. And of course, language and cross-cultural work. Now, so look, I think I've maybe said this once on the channel before. I do like South Korean culture. Of course, there are things I dislike about it, but broadly speaking. In a totally different way, I do like Laotian culture, the culture of Laos. I can say things I appreciate. They're totally different cultures. And I've got to say, I really dislike Cambodian culture. I didn't know that, right? See, my point here is I don't like all cultures. That's not possible. If you like the culture in Germany, you're probably not going to like the culture in England. I mean, there's real differences here. If you like one, you can't possibly like them all or like them all equally. Some things are going to bother you more. But that in itself, being engaged in research and humanitarian work and this stuff, you may think it's shallow, but it's really not. It was really a pretty profound confrontation with who I am when I realized what it was about Cambodian culture I couldn't stand, that I hated. And the difference is, even though I just said Laos is a positive example, so I'll give you a specific example. One of the things I hate about Lao culture is the cowardice. It's a very cowardly culture. People will be your friend, but they won't back you up. They won't take risks. Very conformist, very gormless, very conflict avoiding. People don't have a sense of pride and backbone and backing you up, or you doing the right thing because it's the right thing to do, even if you're risking. And by the way, I've been told, I really don't know much, but I'm told Maghrebis are actually the opposite. That people from the Maghreb, if they're your friend, they're going to come to court and testify that you're innocent because they were there and they saw you and they know you're innocent, and they feel very much this. This is what I was told in France.
I think it's kind of a common Arabic culture.
Okay. Anyway.
I think they have this in common with the Middle East also. Yeah. Somewhat my experience with friends does reflect that.
But there's an issue of even if it's a risk to me, I'm going to stand up and do the right thing and I'm going to show my courage because you're my friend and I'm going to do this. And Lao culture is the opposite. I never even thought about that. I never thought about what does courage mean to me, and in what way am I different from Canadian culture, and in what way am I different from Laotian culture and British culture. And that experience, it's real research, it's political, it's humanitarian. But there's also a kind of self-discovery there that it never would have come up if I'd stayed at home reading books. You can learn a lot from books. But and so on for Cambodian and Korean Ojibwe and so on. So to directly answer your question, the real answer has to do with trial and error and failure. And fail, try hard, be sincere, get your heart broken, try again. And maybe some people who are the most disadvantaged, sometimes you meet a young man, and at age 18 he started doing computer programming, and he was successful immediately and made a lot of money. So for my generation, I met a bunch of guys like that. They happened to make a lot of money when they were still 18, 19 years old because they did computer programming in the 1990s when it was easy to make money fast there. And then they never kind of asked these questions. They never had this kind of self-discovery, challenging and being challenged. So that can be an issue too.
I think there's no escaping humbling and failure and this kind of discovery.
Well, I think there is escaping it, but maybe it's even more tragic when you escape it, right? Maybe it's even worse when you don't have that, Yeah.
The actual barrier that I always hit, like when I think about this, like if I want to be a scientist and if I study scientific field in a scientific field, for example, I want to be the best scientist possible.
Yeah,
best
right.
scientist
Yes,
I can.
right.
And that means like dedication,
Right.
dedicating myself to this work 100%. But at the same time, sometimes I feel some kind of a pull and responsibility to be politically active, and for example, now in
Right.
Germany. And to do that, you have to like spend a lot of time like learning about the culture, about the history, about the politics, and like it's impossible to be like the best scientist and the best like political activist or political figure. Like when at what point do you decide, okay, I'm gonna ditch, like for example, being a scientist to dedicating myself to be a political activist? At what point do you say, okay, it doesn't make any sense anymore for me to go on like this? I'm gonna choose a whole another path. Like when do you reach this point? Like because it can always kind of change and improve, and you can assure yourself, okay, it's gonna be better like next year, next 5 years maybe, if I just put in the hard work and continue and like don't like be responsible and hold on to my responsibility as a scientist, for example, or as a student.
I think the honest answer to that question is you'll make that decision on the basis of outcomes. When it is, so if you are in a position where you can have real political power, where you can make a real difference, where you can impact the lives of maybe just hundreds of people, you're friends with the mayor. I mean, it's going to be something as minor as that. Yeah. There's a position in local city government, so maybe it's only going to influence a few thousand people. I think that's exactly when the temptation becomes great to say, no, I have to devote myself to politics.
Yeah.
And the opposite is when you really feel your voice can't make any difference, that you give up politics. That you say, well, I can't, like, I'm not even going to change things for 5 people or 10 people. And and again, I point out, like, this video right now is going to be watched by more people and have a meaningful influence on more people than if I wrote an academic paper and presented it at a conference. And again, still to this day, many of my friends and people I talk to have PhDs and go to conferences. Now, this is not, so there are a lot of things in between. There's actually having political power, working for the mayor or working for the provincial government or something like this. And there's being totally voiceless and feeling totally helpless. Mm-hmm. And most of us, most of the time, are somewhere in between. Well, I have this YouTube channel. I can organize a banquet with 50 people promoting vegan businesses or something. There's some little thing you can do. I can make a T-shirt promoting veganism. I've written a storybook. By the way, sorry, I just was talking to an illustrator. For the first time, someone really offered to illustrate the storybook for free as a form of activism. And I was laughing and saying to him, well, you're the first guy to say you wanted to do it for free. Everyone else were talking about how much money they were going to make out of this. I don't know if it'll work out, but that's still a project I've started doing and still want to do. Publish it. So, yeah, I think that's the reality. It's the magnitude of the outcomes that are going to guide you. And again, you can see, to me, this is a nihilistic kind of thing, and it's I think that's ultimately what's gonna guide that. Yeah, and and so and the flip side is, what would tempt you to give up politics on the other side? So there's the feeling you can't make a difference, but then the other side, what if you're in a position in your business where you say, look, if I quit politics and put all my energy into business, I can make so much money in the next 5 years, or maybe I can do something artistically or creatively or something. Maybe there's something you can accomplish by devoting yourself, just to science or just to art or just to something apolitical, where the outcomes are of such magnitude that you really feel it's worth doing. I can imagine that too. And what if I was in a position where I owned a piece of land and I could take the time and build a house on it? Maybe that only takes 1 year or something. So it's not that big a deal, but that would be my own private self-interest. It's not political. Okay, maybe I should take all my time and energy and build this house. I can imagine that kind of temptation. And even, I volunteered to join the army in Canada to go fight against ISIS. This has nothing to do with veganism. I mean, is it political or apolitical? It's kind of both, as a very dubious, proposition. I have no illusions that this is not charity, joining the army. It's not charity, it's not research, it's not political activism. But for a few years, I consider. I'm sorry, another example, becoming a police officer. If that takes all your time and energy to become a police officer, but you feel you can have a positive outcome or something. So I think we're tempted by the outcomes. Okay, so I am going to rudely cut off the conversation. Do you have something to say?
Yeah.
Okay.
I had something popped in
Good.
my mind again. Yeah, it was. It's about what you saw in Buddhism when you decided to pursue a career path in that.
Yeah.
And it also relates to another point. Like I wanted to ask you, what was the difference between Buddhism and other religions, especially Islam, Christianity, and Judaism, that really made you interested and willing to be a Buddhist at that phase in your life? Do they have a better history when it comes to conversion, to violence, to other aspects of organized religion that we see in the three Abrahamic religions?
The short answer is yes. All of that is true about Buddhism. It does have those advantages also. But I mean, the core of Buddhist philosophy and religion is dukkha, anicca, anatman. So, point one is life is suffering, is the common English translation. I prefer to say to live is to suffer. Okay? So, as an article of faith, or as something a religion is setting down as a dictum, this is very fundamentally different from honor and obey, or the Ten Commandments of Moses, or the basis of Judaism.
Doesn't Christianity say that we live in sin and
let me finish the list. So point one, to live is to suffer. Oh, this is my own rewording. The original Pali actually just says all this is suffering, and all this refers to existence, basically, right? Point two, all is impermanent. Yeah, all things are composed, all things are composite, all things are constantly decomposing. The universe is impermanent, everything is impermanent, right? And there is a little bit of an undercurrent there of everything is meaningless, but that's not the primary meaning. It's often glossed as everything is empty, but the writ is just all is impermanent. Yeah. And then point three, there is no soul. So, your question was, how is Buddhism fundamentally different from all the religions? This already gives you a very powerful sense. Yes, Buddhism really is different from all other religions. And it's not just different from Christianity, Judaism, and Islam. It's very different from the Confucian religion in China. It's very different from Taoism. This is a big, profound... It's very different from Hinduism within India. In terms of the philosophy, this is fundamentally something very different. Yeah. Do you want to ask more about that? I mean, I can answer kind of the other. Okay.
Yeah. What is the motivating factor, the initial factor that got you interested in Buddhism and got you to ditch the other perhaps you were pursuing at the time, but what was really so attractive to you?
A lot of the motivation was negative. A lot of it was disgust with European civilization, Canadian civilization, dissatisfaction with the culture I was born into. So that's really the bedrock, was a negative motivation of wanting to reject, the culture I was born into in Canada. Which, if you guys watch the channel, there are different aspects of that, but including genocide, including the history of the British Empire, genocide and slavery, including all the lies I felt my culture was built on. Lies from the left wing, lies from the right wing, lies of the British Empire. And I think that's part of my personality and perspective, my Muslim viewers, because over the years I used to have some more supporters on Patreon. I think that's something they can relate to, Muslims and ex-Muslims, of really feeling this sense of a burden there. And then, Buddhism presented to me a religion that in some ways resembles nihilism, or is compatible with nihilism, you might say, but that also had the tantalizing possibility of humanitarian work, making a positive difference through charity, which I always wanted, being a part of a community and an ethically defined community, which I always wanted and is still here in veganism. I'm looking for. And aesthetically, I'm not saying ethically, aesthetically, this self-disciplined, sober, militaristic, macho quality, which I always had in me and was never satisfied by the culture I was a part of. I grew up around a bunch of wimps, everybody was too soft for me, and nobody was taking their own responsibility seriously. I grew up around a lot of people who played video games and did drugs and, lived in... This is still true in the Western world. And they lived lives I felt were meaningless. So, how do I react to that? One, I did read, Socrates. Socrates as he exists in Plato and Xenophon and, these other authors. I did read those kinds of Western philosophers. Today, the religion of Socrates is dead. Today, Stoicism and cynicism from ancient Athens are dead. Nobody is preaching those virtues. Nobody is practicing those virtues. That wasn't a practical reality for me, right? I'm not going to become an ancient Athenian philosopher. But many of those same qualities, including the machismo, frankly, is there. You look at various examples of that in Athens. Buddhism is an ancient philosophy from about the same period of time, 2,500 years ago, with those, to me, what I call Bronze Age values, and it's still here now. You can join, you can sign up, and you can get involved with poverty and post-war disaster in Cambodia and Laos. I was even interested in South Korea that way. South Korea is more affluent, but it's also a post-war disaster.
Mm-hmm.
They also have this kind of history. So again, the humanitarian work, the political reality, the economic reality. And so I'm not here misrepresenting Buddhist philosophy. I'm just answering the question of what aspects of Buddhist philosophy appealed to me. Dukkha, anicca, anatman, sunyata in Pali, sunya, emptiness, and then growing out of that philosophy, the social aspects of. That presents itself as a complete package. That's very appealing.
Partly why I ask this question is because during my limited researching and reading into history, especially history of Christianity and Islam, I thought that all religions are the same. They're basically just different exterior. Maybe exterior phenomena, but basically they're the same dynamics apply here and there. And I really wanted to know if there's something intrinsically different with Buddhism and the culture in East Asia, historically.
But after even this conversation, because we did talk about this yesterday also, in very different context. But after these 2 days, would you agree that yes, there's something fundamentally, different about Buddhism? It's not the same as Islam. I think in a very fundamental way. No, is this reasonable to say or no?
I don't think if it's enough, just based on our discussion yesterday.
Okay.
I still haven't researched it and read
sure,
it, but
sure. Yeah.
I'm interested in this topic because I was really searching for something that is different.
Yes.
Something to tell me, there is another way. Especially in the history, it played itself differently, especially with religion and. Its influence on peoples and societies and its relation with power and the political systems. Right.
But historically, Buddhism did have slavery. To give an example, I'm going to say I'm not saying everything is good. Slavery is a very good example. Islam also, in case you don't know, God, also a religion full of slavery. Christianity has a whole history of slavery. They do have things in common, and including the involvement of their religion in slavery and the slave trade in various ways, and benefiting from slavery, being part of a slave society. So my point here is not that Buddhism is morally pure, but you're asking, is it different? And I would emphasize absolutely, fundamentally, yes. Now, what is the future of Saudi Arabia? This is similar to a question he asked me yesterday. This is not the same question. It's similar. If you were to ask, would Saudi Arabia be fundamentally better if, in the future, 60% of its population became Buddhist? I answer yes, and I even attach this. Yes, even if they became the worst form of mainstream Buddhism, the most corrupt form, which I would say is Tibetan Buddhism. It's a terrible form of the Buddhist religion, but that's still much, much better than the form of Islam that exists in Saudi Arabia. And yes, if 60% of people in Saudi Arabia became Japanese Buddhists, which is a terrible form of Buddhism, it's deeply corrupt and so on, that would be better. And if they became Sri Lankan Orthodox Theravada Buddhists, so that tradition, sure, from my perspective, that would be better. So that's a less corrupt version. But my point is, when you're making this kind of comparison, no, I have no hesitation in talking about better or worse. Now, if you ask, would it be even better if the majority of people in Saudi Arabia instead started believing in Athenian democracy? They became skeptical, secular intellectuals who believe this. Like, well, okay, now all of these things are very unlikely to happen. But no, it's not saying that it's ideal, but sure, as a real world alternative. And yeah, I think almost everyone who studies Buddhism does get kind of thrilled by the hope of the possibility that you could have a more Buddhist society, whether it's in England or Canada or California or even within Asia, that Buddhism could make a comeback. But the reality is, since World War II, Buddhism has failed and collapsed and has continued to fail and collapse. It's gotten smaller and smaller and weaker and weaker. Yeah, and just note, today, in 2018, Buddhism is a much less powerful, much less influential philosophy than communism. So we regard communism as a failure, but it's an incredibly powerful ideology compared to Buddhism. Sorry, China is still communist, Cuba is still communist, et cetera, et cetera. And so you can make a list, Vietnam, North Korea. Communism actually still is very influential in the lives of millions of people on a huge scale and to a huge extent with huge consequences. And Buddhism is incredibly weak, even in Sri Lanka, compared to...
What is the cause of this weakening?
So I do have old videos on the channel talking about that. Yeah. The hope was... So this is similar. We talked about a little bit the politics of the Arab world after World War II, in the decolonizing period, where there was a brief period of optimism, and then everything kind of descended into dictatorship, and things seemed to get hopeless. Likewise, in the post-World War II period, there was a period of optimism in the Buddhist countries that Buddhism was going to take on a new direction, politically, socially, and that the religion would be regenerated and revived. And that hope had utterly failed. I mean, it's ended in failure everywhere. I'm generalizing, but I think it's actually a fair generalization. What are the factors involved? Well, one, I could talk about this for hours, but outstanding features. People didn't make the difficult decisions about reconciling faith with science. Now, the Catholic Church also had difficulty with it. Well, evolution. So you mentioned the debate about evolution. This happened within the Catholic Church over a 100-year period or something, approximately. When very gradually, eventually the Pope made a statement that, the Church should stop opposing evolution, that evolution is more than just a theory. They eventually did settle down on this, but for a long time, the Catholic Church opposed. For a period, they opposed the idea that the Earth revolves around the sun, right? The sun revolves around the Earth. So this has been an issue within the Catholic religion. It's still an issue in Islam. In a subtle but pervasive way, it's a huge issue with Buddhism. What is the role of science in relation to religion? There are other examples with modernity in religion, the status of women in religion, women's equality, or even if it's not equality, women's status, women having decent status, even if not equal Can they at least be 90% equal or something, in this religion? Huge challenge for Buddhism. And, but there's a series of challenges here in terms of the confrontation of tradition with modernity. This was the first period in Buddhism when the Bible of Buddhism was directly available to the followers of the religion. The Quran is available to all Muslims and basically has been since the life of the Prophet. Basically, you could say there's a little bit of a lag in terms of publishing and so on, but Buddhism has not been like that. Buddhism has relied on a great deal of faith on monks as the interpreters and custodians of tradition, and that was a huge challenge. So in the same way that when the printing press in Europe first made the Bible available to more Christians, this challenge for Buddhists in dealing with their own tradition and the challenges of modernity. So there was a lot going on in that period of time, and it failed. There was a lot of potential too. There was a lot of hope, and Buddhism failed.
Interesting. I think I should look into it more, especially the history of East Asia and the culture there.
Well, and look, when talking about the weakness of Buddhism today, in Sri Lanka, in Laos, I'll just use the two examples. In both Sri Lanka and Laos, everyone is very afraid of the growing presence of Christianity and the growing presence of Islam. This is basically true in all the Buddhist countries. This is also true in South Korea. It's also true in Myanmar. So these are Buddhist countries that in the past were majority Buddhist. And the percentage of people who are Christian keeps growing, and the percentage of people who are Muslim keeps growing and growing. And they're really afraid Buddhist heritage is going to die and disappear. The opposite is not true anywhere in the world. Is there anywhere where you have a majority Muslim country where Buddhism is growing and growing, and the Muslims say, wow, so many people are converting to Buddhism, we have to really be worried about losing the Muslim tradition? Now why? And challenge yourself, why? Why aren't there a couple examples like that around? This shows the depth of the failure, And, again, judged by the same standards as communism. In communism, generally, you can say is a failure, but there are some big exceptions. China is a really big exception. It's enormous, right? It failed in Russia. Russia ceased to be communist, but, so you should expect, even with a failure, you should expect some exceptions, and we don't have that in Buddhism. So, and with that having been said, we talked about the importance of outcomes. For me, there still is that temptation. Could I do more good in the world by becoming a Buddhist preacher, a leader of Buddhist opinion, even a Buddhist monk, or going back to academia and get a PhD in Buddhism? If I can make more of a positive difference in the world by working within that philosophy and by, let's say, performing funeral rituals, which are pretty harmless, giving a nice speech and a ceremony, and read out an ancient text in Pali and stand there and interpret, talk about the philosophy that all is impermanent and there is no soul. Hey guys, we're doing a funeral ceremony, and guess what? I'm not going to reassure you that this guy's immortal soul is living in Canada. No, living in heaven forever and ever. I'm here to reassure you the opposite, that he never had a soul, and his body is now going to decompose because all things are impermanent and decompose and so on. Sure, the temptation is there because of the possibility of having those positive outcomes. And this is the first time I mentioned this on camera, but this is a brief anecdote, but I think it is an interesting one. I have lucid dreams most of the time. So most of the time when I dream, I'm aware that I'm dreaming, and I can control the dream. But a couple of weeks ago, I had not been thinking about this at all. My girlfriend and I were talking a lot about plans for the future, plans related to baking, plans related to a number of things. But I think probably we're talking about Cree and Ojibwe, whether or not I should start studying Cree again, my options for studying Cree as a language, how much time I should spend on Chinese, how much time I should spend on French, or maybe going back to studying Cree. We were talking about those kinds of issues for the future a lot. But we were not talking or thinking about Buddhism at all. Not for months. It really hadn't been a topic. And I had very powerful dreams 2 nights in a row. And the dream was really about, the dream was really stating to me as its thesis, look, right now is the time for you to go back and commit to Pali, to this ancient language in Buddhism. Now is the time for you to commit to Buddhist studies. Now, you've got to do this. And you're going to take, you can become a major figure in this field academically, and you can be involved in, political community leadership, and you can take on this path, and this can really be a way for you to make a positive difference in the world, in a scholarly sense. Well, again, it's the topics about charity, research, politics, being a public intellectual. This is really the way to do it. And the most surprising thing about the dream, like, if I'd even been talking to one person on the phone about it when I was awake, it wouldn't be that surprising. But I woke up and I said to Melissa, I was like, I can't believe I just had this dream, because I haven't been considering this option at all. This has not been on my mind, even the possibility of going back to Pali. And I remember in the dream also, I in effect said to myself, it was like a Socratic dialogue, but guess what? When you're asleep, you're only talking to yourself, but in the dream, I pointed out to myself, when you went back and studied Laotian again, the Lao language, you remembered so much. You still had the handwriting, you still had the vocabulary, you remember this stuff. When you went back and studied French again, which I'd just been doing at that time, I hadn't studied or thought about French for so many years. You were able to start relearning French again. You studied Pali so much more intensely, in more depth and with more passion. You worked so hard on that language. If you go back to it now with your current level of preparation experience in languages and philosophy and politics, you are going to really be able to blaze a trail in this field of study. And then not just in the field of study, but then this is going to lead to humanitarian work and making a difference. So that temptation is there. And as I say, 2 nights in a row I had dreams about this. And to me it was a totally alien thought. I can't even say this was a repressed thought, but some part of me when I was... Okay, that's great. So Melissa is, I think, falling asleep. I'm just going to turn the camera over and say, "Hi, you look great, babe. Don't worry." There's Melissa on the couch. All right, 2 hours and 21 minutes, guys. I hope you enjoyed this conversation. I'm really pleased to say Mohammed Socrates has been following the channel for 3 years. I hope I still know you 5 years from now. We just talked about, what are the possibilities for the next 5 years. One of the reasons I'm on the internet is to recruit talent, and talent comes in all kinds of shapes and sciences. Sometimes it's somebody who's working in biochemistry. Sometimes it's somebody who's an artist, like the guy who was offering to illustrate my children's textbook. But I didn't come here on YouTube, I don't know, to hang out with a bunch of idiots, or just to make fun of how stupid the other YouTube channels are. You might think that's why I'm here. You might think I'm here for criticism, to say criticism. But no, I'm ultimately out here recruiting new talent because I care passionately about the future of the vegan movement. And I hope you do too. If you're watching this video and you're trying to do something positive for veganism in the next 5 years, send me an email. Hit me up.